Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast. And RJ, Kraken are on a heater, a 2025 heater, 2 games, won 2 in a row, RJ.
Hey, you know what? It's certainly an improvement. Since the last podcast, the Kraken are 3-1.
That is true. They've did a lot of stuff happened in that last episode. I guess maybe drama just agrees with this squad, RJ. Maybe that's what they've been missing all along, is they need more noise around them, and then they can produce.
I don't know that I would go that far. I don't think it's something that necessarily want to encourage.
I think that's what
it is. Correlation always equals causation, but yeah, maybe not.
I think that's what it is, and that's why we should trade for JT Miller, RJ.
We will get to that later in the podcast, actually.
Yes, I know. I was just trying to bring a little something in. Yeah, we're going to talk about some potential trades for the Kraken, stuff that, I was going to say people have linked them to, but that implies that like maybe, people in the industry have linked them to. A lot of this is just what we've seen on like Discord and just in the Kraken community kind of talking about potential trades, but we thought we would go ahead and talk about them. We've got some other stuff here to talk about, including maybe why they've been winning here as of late and what the keys to that success have been, and some of the players that have been driving it, one of which might surprise you maybe. Because also maybe they're driving it, maybe not. It's unclear. But we will talk about it.
They're driving things.
They're driving things. Things are happening. And you know what? I was going to say one other like preview thing, but I'm just going to use that as a segue because, RJ, as we thank our wonderful sponsor, the podcast, the law offices of Rico Tessendor, I want to mention driving. Because over this past weekend, my girlfriend Julia had a game down in Kent. We were driving back up from it. And you know that part, as you're coming into Seattle, as you're coming into the city, the 5, it kind of goes like up and down a little bit as it's all, you're up on all the bridges and stuff, and all that stuff kind of like drifts off. Is that another freeway off on the right that like splits off as you're just coming into the city? Might be. Something splits off over there.
Like that goes out to the east side?
Yeah. So, that right after that split, we're coming through, and, if you're driving on that road and you're all the way to the right, but you didn't take that split, which is where I was, you've just got a wall to your right. And we were driving there, and this Toyota Highlander decided that it really wanted to be exactly where I was. So it just started, changing lanes like right into me. And I mean,
in that driver's defense, I'm sure we all want to be exactly where you are, but shouldn't always act on that.
Who wouldn't, RJ? Okay. But yeah, so that happens. Thankfully, I was, raised in the fiery hellfire that is LA driving. So I've got lots of defensive driving skills. So naturally I sped up and I got out of that situation because that's what you do. And, but I did talk, me and my girlfriend were like, geez, that was a close one kind of thing, right? We were almost really put into the wall there. And I did the very first thing out of my mouth. And this is how advertising works, everybody. And this is why we have commercials and everything. Very first thing out of my mouth was, wow, we almost had to call Rico. Mm-hmm. So that was the first thing I thought of was, oh, we almost needed Rico Tessendor right there. And while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident, potentially on the road like I almost was there. And if you are, we hope you do call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. And yeah, like I said, I thought about it right away. It's working.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, glad you two are okay. Glad you had the experience of that. The driving in LA, I thought when you said that, I just thought of like the Elmo and the fire meme. Like, yes. The LA driving that we're both familiar with.
Which I guess it kind of is right now. As the fires are still burning, wind advisory still in effect. It is still absolutely terrible.
Oh yeah, I guess I didn't mean to make that connection. But
yeah, no, I mean, I also kind of did, but it's growing up there, that is what it is, right? Like it's terrible driving, and wildfires are the natural disaster that we do have to deal with, and it is still just absolutely brutal. My sister, shout out to Abby. I haven't done this yet, but when she was up here, she had a conference in Seattle. She was watching the dogs while Julie and I went down for your wedding. She actually skipped going right back to Michigan, and she actually went down and did a lot of volunteer work to help at like donation centers and stuff down in LA, because she was just like, being from LA, she's like, I gotta do this. So I want to shout out Abby there for helping out, and all the people that have been doing all the great work to help everybody down there who have, lost homes or been impacted by the fires that, like I said, still going on. Like, I know
and
news cycle
shout
moves
out to
fast, but it's still
yeah,
going
and
on.
shout out to the Kraken, because I believe they donated the
Yes.
share of the 50-50 raffle funds for the game against LA
Mhm.
to the LA fire relief, and of course shouted out the first responders during that game. So
Yep.
Kraken are part of that as well.
Yeah, during that Kings game, it was cool to see for sure. Like that a lot. All right, RJ, as we move into talking about the Kraken here, the first thing that we're going to talk about are the injury updates that we got from Ron Francis, what feels like a million years ago.
I know that appearance on the Kraken pregame show. It feels like a long time ago, but he did give some very important injury updates for Jordan Eberle and Yanni Gourde. So we'll start with, I think, the better news of the two, and that's Jordan Eberle. So he is off crutches, and at the time, which was about a week ago, he said he should hit the ice in a week or two. And as far as a return, Francis said that more towards the end of February. Excuse me, more toward the end of February is kind of what they're looking at as far as an Eberle return. And also good sign at the Kraken's last game at home, right, against Buffalo. Jordan Eberle was there. The video in the locker room sees him with his teammates. He's walking around. He's looking a lot better.
Mhm.
And so that's a really good sign, I think, for Jordan Eberle. And we worried that injury could be very, very bad. We were wondering whether we might even see him this season at all, but sounds like he's progressing really well. So keep an eye on that. Probably still at least a month out, but
Yeah.
it's good news.
Yeah, no, and I did see him yesterday, walking into the locker room and everything while we were down there, and it was really great to see him not on crutches, because that was the first time that I've seen him not on the crutches, and it looked like he was moving fine, looked normal, love it.
Yeah. Now, on the flip side, unfortunately, Yanni Gourde, Francis said that he has no time frame for return, but quote, at least a couple weeks, depending on what we find. And for a guy who's been injured, already for at least a week, right? Depending on what we find, I feel like is not a very good sign that they're still doing tests. They're still trying to figure out some stuff. I know that was the initial reaction on the Jordan Eberle injury. We're like, well, we need to do some more tests and figure some things out. So no real definitive timeline for Yanni Gourde. I mean, Dan Bylsma talked about it, I think, a couple days ago too at a morning skate, and didn't sound too optimistic. Like, yeah, we're still trying to figure some stuff out. So Gourde out indefinitely, and so hopefully they find what they need to, and he's able to kind of start making that return back. But he has not seen the ice since.
Yeah, it's really tough, and it has been labeled or at least by Dan, right, mid body.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. Dan didn't label it mid-body.
Yeah,
injury.
and so we know kind of from past experiences with the Kraken, mid body might mean maybe potentially back. Again, don't know, but potentially back, which would be hard to diagnose. I know, because I'm going through that process right now with my back, and it is just one of those brutal things of something's wrong, and it's just not easy to figure out what it is at all, and it's frustrating, I think, for everybody involved. Obviously, probably most so for Yanni Gourde, but I'm sure it's frustrating for the team to not have something more concrete. It is just one of those weird, mystery things that, like, backs, it impacts you so much more than you think it will, and it's just so not clear when something's wrong. It's brutal.
And Bosma also did go on to say that it is the same injury that
Mhm.
Yanni has been dealing with kind of throughout the season, and that's kept him out previously. It's just something that he's kind of been dealing with and has been nagging him. And I guess it just got bad enough that he just couldn't play.
Right. Or it got bad enough that it was, he was going to have to miss a couple games again. And they just said, you know what, let's really try to figure out what's wrong here, rather than maybe going with this back and forth thing, because that's kind of, again, if it's a back, same situation with me. There's days where I feel really good and things feel good, and I'm back up. I'm walking around pretty normally. I can do a lot of stuff. And then there's other days where I just wake up and I just can't do anything. And so I could see that being an issue if you're an athlete, and if you're a team who employs an athlete. not having that kind of certainty day to day about somebody's availability, and obviously not wanting to risk anything long term. I could see them maybe wanting to just be like, look, let's try to figure this out for realsies, and then we'll move from there.
Yeah, no, I could see that being the case. But in the meantime, Gord is out, and we're not really sure, when he's going to come back. So,
Yeah.
and with that though, the Kraken have actually, I don't know if this is the segue we want, right? But they've they've kind of filled that spot surprisingly well.
Yeah, they actually have. Kraken doing well, like you said. They're 3-1 since the last podcast that we recorded. They're riding that 2-game win streak here, both against the Kings and then last night against the Buffalo Sabres, or I guess yesterday against the Buffalo Sabres with that 1:00 start. And you know what? They look pretty good, RJ. And one of the things that I think has been potentially working for them is they have made, a couple little lineup tweaks. And I think they're actually working. And I think the big one that we should start with is, and we talked about this yesterday, it's John Hayden coming in for Ty Cartier. And I know there's lots of fans of Ty Cartier out there, and I'm definitely one of them. I think you are as well. But I don't think it can be denied that John Hayden just brings a different style to that fourth line. And what we've seen these last couple games, particularly these last 2 home games from that fourth line, it's been a fourth line capable of going out there and really, making life uncomfortable for the other team. They're going to make the most of their, limited ice time. They're not getting a ton, but they're going to go out there and they're going to make things uncomfortable, particularly net front. And then, especially last night, start seeing production from him.
Right. And the production, especially from John Hayden, he scores a big goal early in that Buffalo game where the Kraken did not start well. I mean, they were kind of reeling for a while. They could have been down 2-0 or so. Buffalo finally converts to make it 1-0, but they have a response goal less than a minute afterward. And it's John Hayden just fighting his way to the net front, something that we've talked about a lot this season, that we want to see more from Kraken players. And we know he's always willing to do that. Point shot comes in, he fights his way to the slot, and the rebound comes right out to him. And he's getting rewarded for that hard work. And you're right, he does bring this other element to the fourth line that, as much as we like Ty Cartier just doesn't bring. And I don't think really any other Kraken players fully bring. John Hayden just does something kind of unique for this team. And you're right. Also, he makes life uncomfortable for opponents. I mentioned this on a post game a couple games ago, but just the way that when a goalie covers the puck, he just goes straight to the net and just kind of stands over the goalie. He's not going to touch him. He's not going to do anything like that, but he's just going to stand there and dare opponents to try and shove him out of the way. And a lot of opponents, they don't really want any part of that. They kind of will let him stand there for a few seconds and then he'll skate away. Others kind of give him a shove sometimes, but it's one of those just almost like a power thing, right? Like, yeah, I'm going to stand here. I dare you to do something about it. And there aren't many Kraken players that will do that. And I do think it kind of does have a little bit of a mental intimidation factor, especially for a fourth line. When you're often against the other team's fourth line, it often is a physical battle. This is a more traditional fourth line, and they're getting that more traditional fourth line deployment, right? 5 to 8 minutes or so for each one of these players, a few select shifts, but you just got to go out there. You got to battle and win those few shifts every night. And this line's doing that.
Right. And so much of it has been the possession, battle, and them winning that. And just the fact that they tend to be in the offensive zone a lot more than they're in the defensive zone. So that's obviously a big part of things. And it's certainly what you want out of a fourth line. That's what you want out of any of your lines, but especially out of a fourth line while, in theory, right, your big guns are all resting on the bench. You want a fourth line that's going to be able to go out there and keep anything bad from happening. They don't necessarily need to do anything for you, but they need to make sure that the other team's not getting anything done. And this line absolutely does that. They spend so much time in the offensive zone. And with John Hayden being that net front presence that other teams have to account for, and you talk about the intimidation factor, I don't know how much of that is intimidation towards a goalie, but certainly if you're a defenseman and you see that after like every play and your goalie has to make that cover, and then you're seeing this looming presence right over them, that gets in your head and you're like, okay, this guy is like always there. It means you maybe start playing a little bit more conservatively. You start hanging around your own net that little bit of extra time, and it just opens things then up for the Kraken to maneuver and operate. And I do think that we're seeing that from that fourth line. Not only is it that they're just doing a good job of going to the net front, and that's why we're seeing more plays happen there, but I think we're seeing more behind the net plays, more plays kind of in that one level out from around the net, but it's still, I would consider, high danger areas. But we're seeing that fourth line be able to do a lot of stuff there as far as, winning positional battles or just being open. They're able to make passes to each other in those tight windows the way none of the other forward lines on this group can. And I do think that has been because John Hayden is just kind of so plastered right up against the crease. Defensemen, they don't like that. They want to be there and they want to take him away. But guess what? That then gives you a little bit of extra space kind of right out in front of that, because in today's NHL, where most teams want to be able to attack in transition, forwards maybe aren't coming back as much as they used to. And so that if you can keep those defensemen in close, you can kind of create a kind of soft spot between those two layers of defense. And I feel like this fourth line is doing a really good job of creating that soft spot and then utilizing it to generate chances for themselves, which then again just has that compounding factor of like, here's this fourth line out here. We're spending the whole time in our defensive zone when they're out here. And also they're generating high quality looks. Like what are we doing? And now a coach has to look at that and maybe he has to throw out, maybe not his third defensive pairing when you have your fourth line out there. And then maybe that opens up opportunities for other lines for you. So just the fourth line playing the way that they do, having the looks that they're generating, kind of having the psychological win that they're potentially having out there, it just creates this snowball effect that can then help the rest of the lineup beyond just, when they do score the occasional goal or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. We saw it in the last game against Buffalo where they were out there against the Tage Thompson line for one shift, and they kept that Thompson line hemmed in the Buffalo zone for a full shift, about a minute long. And that's great when you can do that. It takes a Thompson shift away from the top guys. Even a few games back against Pittsburgh, I think John Hayden was out there against Sidney Crosby for almost 3 minutes in that game. Not a ton of time, but like 3 minutes against Sidney Crosby. Kraken had 100% of the shots during that time. And so if you can just do that in that limited role, that's going to help you quite a bit.
Absolutely. So that's a huge one there. And, with Ty Cartier being out of the lineup, obviously John Hayden brings something that I feel like the Kraken needed, or at least that fourth line maybe needed, or it's at least utilizing extremely well. With Ty Cartier being out of the lineup, I mentioned this last night on the post game. Look, I feel like Ty Cartier, he's got good size to him. He can be a physical player, but I think of him more as an energy guy, a motor guy, somebody who's going to play that 200-foot game, maybe do a little bit more of what Turbo does as far as trying to get the puck up the ice quicker, right? Get out of the defensive zone fast, go into the offensive zone, do stuff like that. And, maybe also has maybe a little bit more skill than John Hayden, ability to score maybe a little bit more frequently. I think that with this current lineup, I really like what John Hayden's doing. I like what Mitchell Stevens is doing. I like that the way the fourth line is set up right now. I wouldn't hate the idea of Ty Cartier maybe sitting out, leave John Hayden in that spot, and then post trade deadline, if Brandon Tanev is moved, insert Ty Cartier over on that side and let him kind of do the Brandon Tanev thing of being the aggressive forechecker who's going to come at teams with speed and come at teams with that motor that doesn't ever seem to let up. I think that's maybe a better use of Ty Cartier's natural inclinations out there on the ice.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's kind of the better fit for him in that spot. And it's just tough because you have a Brandon Tanev there who's going to do good work on the PK, who's going to be able to even produce a little bit more this season, right? And so for Cartier, it's kind of hard to compete because you can't bring exactly what Hayden does. I do think there was an element of getting under opponent's skin that Cartier did bring a lot last season, and I really liked that about him, but we just haven't seen that in a long time. And so if he's not going to bring that, I think Hayden is going to just do that more effectively.
Yeah, and it sure definitely seems like he has been. Looking at other things that we've kind of seen, based on the lineups, and one of the things with Yanni Gourde being out as well has been Matty Beniers has been playing more on the PK RJ and starting to get a sample size large enough for us to kind of look at the numbers. And we were looking at the numbers, and you know what? He's doing all right out there.
Yeah, no, he's doing okay. Their numbers aren't like stellar, but I feel like, looking at it, none of the Kraken players' numbers were really stellar on the PK. So I think he's doing a little bit better than some of his peers there. But I don't know. What do you think about Matty, like eye test wise? Because the numbers, let's be honest, none of the Kraken penalty killers look all that great. Oddly enough, Ty Cartier had very limited sample size at best Kraken PK numbers. But what do you think about it eye test wise? Do you like what you're seeing from him out there and the way that he's playing on the PK?
I do. And I'm seeing a lot of what I saw from Matty Beniers prior to him being drafted when he would play on the PK. I mean, he was a big part of like Team USA at World Juniors, playing on the PK and just really truly disrupting what other teams do. And I was thinking about, putting together the scouting reports that I did on YouTube way back when we were just starting off the channel, and the ones where I would look at Matty Beniers, and so much of the focus of what I talk about with him was, whether it was on the PK or at 5-on-5, just how disruptive he can be in the offensive zone when the other team has the puck, right? And I don't mean like traditional forechecking rules all the time, but some of that is there, and just his ability to just never let them really get set on a breakout, and just keep them kind of hemmed in their own zone, force them to have to do an extra regroup before they load up and kind of come out. And we haven't seen a lot of that in the limited action that we've gotten from Matty Beniers on the PK, but what we've seen is him kind of take that and apply it in the defensive zone, I feel like. And I think it was maybe it was the LA game, but there was a sequence where he was out there on the PK, and the puck was kind of along the boards, and he went and he just kind of tied up two players along the boards for a good like 5 or 6 seconds, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but it was a lot of time while the other team has the puck in the offensive zone on a power play. And it was just him kind of not even like totally, using his body to tie them up on the boards, just him kind of constantly poking the puck away from them and just kind of keeping them in tight. And they're having to, utilize two players just to get around the one Matty Beniers. And that's, taking away the advantage of the opposing team's power play, right? The whole idea is they have the man advantage. They have an extra guy out there. If Matty Beniers is forcing you to commit two players as resources to just anytime the puck's along the boards, get it out of there and move it around, he's taking away that natural advantage that your power play is supposed to have. So I've noticed plays like that have made me go, okay, that Matty that I watched when he was, 17, 18 years old, it's still in there. And I think given more time, we'll see him start to do that stuff more in the neutral zone, and then maybe even eventually in the offensive zone, just kind of keeping teams from being able to, get their first look, move up the ice on the power play.
And even with the scoring struggles that Matty's had, I think the defensive prowess in his own zone has never really gone away. I think that's been consistent through his entire time in Seattle. So you'd expect that on the PK, I think.
Yeah, exactly. No, he's just a really smart defensive player. He knows how to do that stuff. But one of the things that I've kind of missed about him from watching him during his time at Michigan, both pre and post draft, has been that kind of like annoying, pesky, forward who's kind of keeping other teams from being able to generate what they want to generate. And I feel like I'm starting to see that again from him when he's on the PK. He kind of can't do it all the time at 5-on-5 as a center. It's just not really the setup that the Kraken run. And at the NHL level, you've got to be a little bit more conservative than you can maybe get away with at the college level when you're the second overall pick. But I do like that I'm kind of starting to see that attitude from him that I feel like he had in that first 10-game stint he played with the Kraken way back when during year one. And it's just kind of nice to see that come out again. And I think, his larger success and the confidence that he's starting to play with is probably also helping with that. But I do think him being put in a position where you kind of want to have that edge to you on the PK has helped as well.
Yeah, I agree. And look, at this point in the season, right, it's all about the young players growing and developing and building that confidence. And I hope that when Yanni Gourde comes back, right, if, again, we don't know when that's going to be, but Beniers has kind of taken part of that Yanni Gourde spot on the PK. I hope they keep Matty Beniers there. And of course, Gourde might be a trade deadline target anyway, so it might not be for very long that he's back. But I hope Matty keeps that spot, because I think it is one of those things that's helping him build his confidence kind of all around. And look, he can handle it. He's 22. He's their top line center right now. It's not anything you need to shelter him from.
Yeah, exactly. Now I'm trying because we could talk about Shane Wright and kind of his success too, because he's just kind of he's maybe not piling up the points the way that he was after the scratch, but he's still producing enough, RJ. But it does feel like we're starting to see at times a little bit more from him as far as stepping up and being able to take on some of those tougher matchups and things like that. Although, then you have the game against Buffalo last night where he has a beautiful assist on one of the goals, but he only plays 11-16. So I don't know.
And I guess we should talk a little bit more about the Shane Wright situation, because since our last podcast, on our last podcast, I was talking about how I think Shane Wright needs more ice time. That's going to be best for his development. And there has been a bit of a response since then from Coach Bilesma just about why they're handling it the way they are. I think it was Piper Shaw that asked the question. And then also on the Kraken Hockey Network, Allison Lucan did a good job kind of explaining maybe what the team's thought process might be and kind of getting us into that mindset that they might have. And I was happy to see those, them talking about it, because I'm there. I admire the transparency, at least, because it seems like they have a plan for Shane Wright where the team still believes that he is better served playing in fewer minutes against, in some favorable matchups, rather than getting more ice time, getting some tougher matchups. It seems like they still want him in kind of phase 2 of that plan that I outlined last week, where, phase 1, you kind of have the reset with healthy scratch. Phase 2, you let him build confidence in some easier matchups. And then phase 3, you kind of ramp things up. Feels like they still want him in phase 2. And Dan Bilesma did reference, or was it Bilesma or Allison? I'm sorry, I don't remember. But Matty Beniers and the confidence that maybe playing in tougher matchups year 2 kind of hurt Matty Beniers' confidence, and kind of they ramped him up too soon. Mm-hmm. I think they might be worried about doing something like that for Shane Wright. And, can he handle it yet? Can he not? So it seems like that's kind of the thought process from the team. And look, I still don't agree with it. I tend to subscribe to the idea that giving a young player more chances to fail or succeed, well, either succeed or you learn a lesson. I think it's one of those two, right? That's going to be more beneficial to his growth in the long run. But I can understand the other side of that argument. I think, reasonable and smart people can disagree about what is the best way to develop a player, right? And so I'm glad I at least kind of have a better idea, where I might not agree with their process here with Shane Wright right now, but I can understand it. I can see where they're coming from. And at the end of the day, these are people in an NHL front office and coaching staff, and I'm not. So they very well might know better than me, but that's kind of where I'm at. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm more or less there as well, right? I tend to lean more towards you as far as like let the kid play, especially in a year where it's kind of like a lost season for you from a team perspective. Go ahead, go out there, and this is what's going to matter more for your group in the long run. And I think both of these kind of come from the idea of you need Shane Wright to work out. If you're the Seattle Kraken, like he was a top 5 pick for you, top 4 pick, right? You do need him to develop into somebody who can, be like a point per game player potentially, somebody who can be a potential, 25, 30 goal scorer eventually in the NHL, all of those things. You really do kind of need that from him. And so I think it's just a matter of, they're taking a little bit more of a conservative approach, kind of let it be a little slower, make sure that there's no kind of hiccups along the way, versus us kind of wanting to throw him in the deep end. I think it's a thing that you got to take player by player, and they are going to know him a lot better than we are, and so I have no problem trusting it. And I certainly think that the way they've handled him so far this season, it's hard to deny that, like with the 3-game scratch and everything, that wasn't a good thing, because I was just looking at the splits from that. I mean, the 18 games he played prior to being benched, he had 2 points, both of which came in 1 game. So he had 17 games where he was not collecting a point during that stretch. He only had 12 shots on goal in those 18 games. And then you look at the games since, 27 games since, 20 points, which, a lot better, and 31 shots in the 27 games, right? They talked about wanting him to, carry the puck more, make more plays with the puck, shoot the puck more in different situations, that being something that really the team in general needs to do. But he was able to kind of sit there with members of the front office and hear that while watching games, and it does look like he has applied it. And like 20 points in 27 games for somebody who is in their first NHL season, RJ, if it was earlier in the year, we'd be like, wow, Shane is off and going. Like this is fantastic. What an incredible start to a year. And so, maybe that started a little bit later on into the season. It started in late November, but that is something that you take from anybody in their first full NHL season, is 20 points in 27 games, and them, shooting the puck at above a shot per game and all of those kinds of things. So I do think that the way that they're working it is working. It's just maybe not as fast as what we want, or, again, he's one of the few exciting parts of a season that hasn't really gone that well. And so maybe we just want to see him more on a nightly basis because it's more fun to watch him.
Well, there's that added benefit too, but I still think it's better for his development if you take the training wheels off, especially given some of these games that you have. Like again, this game against Buffalo. Like Buffalo is just so bad, and I know you're trying to win every game you can because you haven't really thrown in the towel on the season yet. But 11 minutes. I just don't know how much. I don't know how much Shane really develops or grows from that game.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, I've been saying it all along, right? There's no point in having him come in and be a fourth line center. You need more minutes as a young player than fourth line center minutes. And when you start getting around 11 minutes, it's kind of fourth line minutes, right? And so I'm with you that you need more. That's been the other interesting thing looking at the splits prior to the 3-game scratch. He was averaging 12.25 of ice time, and since then he's averaging 13.56. So obviously, that is a good jump in ice time, but it's still 13.56. I probably would have said that you want a 14 plus number from this year, right?
Yeah.
That to me is a true like third line center.
Yeah, and that's all I was saying when I was bringing up those comps of other players that are younger than him or that are, with other teams, is just that he's playing. It's not just that he's playing a little bit less than other players kind of like him. He's playing miles less than them. He's playing much, much less. You talk about like 60 something games, more than his career high, which again, if I see the decision that the organization is consciously making, I understand that they want to do it differently than these other teams are doing. And I understand that. I still disagree with it, but at least I can understand it. But I just think everyone should know that the Kraken are handling this differently than many other teams with similar players. And it
Yeah.
might be right, it might be wrong, but they are handling it very differently.
Yeah. And again, I think their expectation from a team group standpoint was different than maybe some of those
For
other
sure.
situations.
For sure.
And that does lead into it as well, just to, again, not totally like say that the front office is off on their own doing something. A lot of those teams were not teams that were expecting or trying to make the playoffs. Kraken were, and so they wanted to maybe limit the ice time of younger guys. It's just that now there's no reason.
That's the thing. When the Kraken still had any more than a 1% chance at the playoffs, that's a totally legitimate point, and go for it. But we're not in that territory really anymore. So now, as these games happen, you don't really have that reasoning.
Yeah, go ahead and open them up, right? Like so. All right, we talked about the PK guys there, RJ, and we were saying that the metrics and everything for a lot of the players on the PK aren't that great. The underlying numbers aren't that great, and yet the PK, it's a little below average, RJ, but it's not terrible from an overall PK percentage. So we were like, well, that probably only means one thing, and that's Joey Daccord stepping up and helping you out on the PK a lot. And really, RJ, where isn't Joey Daccord stepping up and helping out this team a lot? It just seems like every single game, now that he's back, now that he's healthy, he is just the guy, and he's going to keep you in games and potentially help you win games you otherwise probably shouldn't.
Exactly. And I think that really is the biggest story of these 4 games, that since our last podcast with the Kraken going 3-1, is that's the biggest thing that's changed. It's just that Joey Daccord is back to playing, I think, Vezina candidate level hockey, where he is winning the Kraken games that they otherwise would not win. And really, I think it is all 3 wins of this past week. I think the Kraken go 3-1 in that stretch that since our last podcast, with wins against Pittsburgh, LA, and Buffalo. I think without Joey Daccord, or even with average goaltending, I think they're 0-4 in that stretch. That Pittsburgh game, I mean, it got Tristan Jarry sent on waivers. The goaltending matchup, was pretty uneven, and Joey really did his part in that game. The Kraken probably didn't deserve to win that one. Against LA, you get outshot 17-1 in the third period. The Kings put on a massive push to try and tie that game. Joey stops all 17 shots with average goaltending. An average goalie is allowing at least one of those to send it to overtime, probably more than one. And then in that Buffalo game, I know Daccord allows 4 goals in that one, but it could have been a lot worse, especially early on. Buffalo had some dynamite chances, and I think it was like almost a quality start for Joey, depending on natural stat trick money puck, which one you're looking at, right? Buffalo had around 4 expected goals, so he did kind of as expected. Not a good defensive performance by the Kraken at all, but I strongly believe they do not get a single win in that stretch without Joey Daccord playing the way that he's playing. And so I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. It feels like we've had the same conversation a few times this season, right? Where just like Joey is driving results here for this team. But it does, lead to some other questions. I guess one, is that even a good thing right now, given where they're at in the standings, and is getting wins that maybe you don't deserve to win? Is that a good thing at this point in the season? I'd argue that maybe it could be, especially if those wins are at home. Then it could be worth it. But the other big question, though, is that, of course, as we know, Joey Daccord was injured through early January, and so he comes back from injury and plays in that Columbus game as Philip Grubauer gets yanked on January 9th. And since then, he has played in 7 straight games directly after returning from injury. 5 of those are starts because he did come in for Grubauer twice. Grubauer had been yanked in his last 2 starts. But Joey is back to being a workhorse for this team, immediately coming off of an injury. I don't know. Are they starting to overwork him again? Because they have leaned really heavily on Joey Daccord. And it feels like this is another one of those situations where, with Grubauer having been pulled out of his last 2 starts, and a lot of that not his fault. Like that Detroit game, nobody was going to do well with that defense. Columbus, you could make a similar argument. But it feels like maybe you can't fully trust a Grubauer start at this point. And with the way that Joey's playing, it just seems like that's the way the team wants to go.
Well, look, obviously, like you said earlier, right? This is not a team that has thrown in the towel. They are one where they feel like they still need to be pushing, and maybe they think that they have a chance, or maybe it's just that they need to save some face. Whatever the reason, they are obviously still pushing and going for it. And the bottom line is, he absolutely gives you the best chance to win on any given night in net. That's just it. And so they're going to use him plenty, like they have been. I'm really split on this because, look, I like watching him. I like the idea of maybe giving him a good solid workload for a year, just so you kind of know, okay, at what points along the way does he start breaking down, or does he have dips? What starts to wear and tear on him personally, so that and you can address those situations in other seasons in which you are in a better you are in better shape. Like I like the idea of being able to kind of basically get that data on him as somebody that is going to be a true workhorse and play like Connor Hellebuck, basically, is what they're doing with him right now. On the flip side, I don't want you to burn him out either, right? Like that's the problem with all of this. I don't know. I'm really kind of back and forth on this. I think I would probably put playing him a little bit less, just because it is more or less a lost season in the sense of you're not going to be making the playoffs. And so I think the fact that you just signed him to a 5-year extension that hasn't even kicked in yet, you want him to be as healthy for as much of that extension as possible. He's already dealt with injury issues this year. I think you should probably scale it back a little bit. Like, I don't think you need to potentially be looking at like 8 straight start territory when your backup is healthy. Like, I just don't think that that's a good idea for really any team to do. We've certainly been very critical of the Winnipeg Jets for doing it over these last couple of years. So I would be a hypocrite if I said, anything else, but also I just truly don't believe in it as well. So I would kind of slow the roll a little bit with Joey. I'd pick some of the games that you think you can, Gru either has good career splits against, or you think maybe they're just a better matchup for Gru. And I would definitely work him in some, just because I just feel like it's too heavy a workload. I don't like the fact that Joey missed time, RJ. And yet here I am looking at him versus all these other goalies and looking at these goalie tables to look at, goals saved above expected leaders and stuff. And he's played more games than a lot of them, almost all of them actually, and he's missed time. Like, that's a scary proposition to me, and that just alone, like the gut reaction I had to seeing that tells me it's been too much.
Yeah, it has, by just about any measure of just the way that you want, how much you want a goalie to play. I'm trying to look at where he ranks. He's played 30 games. That's 7 games off of Connor Hellebuck, the NHL leader, but that's still pretty high for Joey Daccord, especially given that he missed time, and you are packing that into a really tight window. I'm worried he's going to get hurt again. But you know what? Like, I guess if I'm going to try and make the argument on the other side, because I of course would sprinkle Grubauer in here more, just because again, you're not going to make the playoffs. I have kind of thrown the towel in on that goal for the season. I know the team hasn't, but if you're putting yourself in that mindset, and again, my job's not on the line, right? I'm not going to potentially be fired as the coach or GM, and if my job was on the line, then maybe I would think, okay, we've got a 1% chance. Let's kind of keep going for it at this point. If that is your mindset, though, why not play Decord as much as possible in the near run while you still, because look, realistically, what it's going to take for them to get back in the playoff conversation. And I know we've kind of, again, given up on that, but realistically, I think what it would take is, and this is just a start, back in the conversation, not that you're even going to get there, but you're going to have to win every single game until the Four Nations break. That's your next 9 games. And so that would be a total 11 game win streak. And even then, I did the math. That gets you to a 552 points percentage. If you completely win out those next 9 games till the Four Nations break, that still gets you to what? By winning by points percentage now, right? That gets you to 10th in the West, but you're within range kind of points percentage wise of Calgary and Vancouver, who both of them are, kind of in free fall. Like it still doesn't look great, but that's what you're talking about. You got to win your next like 10, 11 games probably to even think about this. And so why not just start Joey Decord as much as possible in that stretch and see what you can get. And you can always rest him down the stretch when it is over and you've thrown in the towel or whatever. I don't know. I'm trying to rationalize this in my head. But because later starts for Joey Decord at the end of the season don't do anything for you.
Right. No, I agree with that line of thinking. I just know that no team will do that, right? Because that looks then too much like you're potentially tanking. If you have a goalie who is at the, a top 10 goalie in the league, and then you're just like, yeah, we're worried about overworking him in this year that we're not making the playoffs, so we're going to rest him down the stretch. It looks suspicious, right? And you're going to have people call you out as, oh, they're trying to tank for draft position. They're starting their, they're not starting their good goaltender. Like, you're not going to be able to get away with it from a PR perspective. Even if it is the smart thing to do, it's what teams in general should do. But I do think that is something that would get you noticed and talked about.
In Seattle, no. In Seattle, it's not getting.
Well, but I think that's the danger. Is
5 out of 6 games,
right?
Then sure, that gets you noticed and talked about. But if you're kind of going to like a rough alternating starts or whatever, and just kind of keeping the workload on Joey down, I think it's fine. No one's going to talk about that. It's not a big deal, especially not out on the West Coast. But I was thinking more just from an injury perspective, right? Where if you do overwork him and he gets hurt and banged up, then okay, you just rest him further down the season, and you just hope that injury is not something that lingers into next season, or is it? And that's where you're playing a very risky game. Yeah. The game that I would not play. I would not risk it. But I'm thinking, again, if my job's on the line, I don't know. Maybe I am rolling the dice on that just a little bit. Like, what are the odds the injury is something that'll linger all the way until next season if he does get banged up? I don't like thinking that way. But I'm just trying to put myself in, in someone's shoes that maybe has a little more to lose than I do.
I just think we're seeing so many more goaltenders start to have hip injuries that are more severe, long lasting
over a career. You're right.
Yeah. I think, again, you've committed the next 5 years to Joey. I think you got to do everything you can to keep the wear and tear off of him now. For those 5 years, and any year in which you're not in it, I think you manage starts and you play that game. And then the in theory, you want it to be all 5 of those years that you can go for it. Reality probably won't be the case. But I think in the years that you have a legit shot, you go ahead and you lean on him. But any year in which you're not, you do not put those reps on his body. That's how I would just manage it. If I was anybody, whether it's a Joey Decord and the Kraken or any team, I just think that's kind of the way teams need to start thinking about things. And, if you're a good enough team like a Winnipeg where you don't need him in every single game, you shouldn't be playing Connor Hellebuck as much as they're playing him either. I just think it doesn't make sense to do that anymore in today's NHL, where we know the physical damage and trauma that it's putting on these guys' bodies to play the modern style of goaltending. That is even different from like a Jonathan Quick, right? We talk about how much fun it is to watch a Jonathan Quick. Jonathan Quick is not an old school goaltender in the sense of, oh, he played 25 years ago, right? Like Jonathan Quick is still active in the NHL, but I guarantee you his body doesn't have some of the same stuff that the guys who have been playing longer and more games in today's, with today's style have, right? Just because he does that little bit extra that is still standing up or is based more on pure athleticism rather than just being big and being in butterfly and trying to maneuver as much while you're down in butterfly and all of that kind of stuff that you hear all these, goalie experts kind of talk about now. I just think it's one of those that I don't know that any team can kind of take that risk and really stick a big workload on anybody.
Yeah, and we do agree completely in that philosophy. I'm just playing devil's advocate
Yeah.
here, on the timing of these starts. I'm with you 100%, but it is just something for Kraken fans, I think, to look at and to monitor what the team decides to do going forward with these starts, because when you get up into 10, 11, 12 straight games played, you are asking for trouble, I think.
I agree with that for sure. And it does seem like that's what we're looking at with this group, right? Like that does seem to be the direction that the Kraken are kind of going here. So we'll see.
They've got the Washington game. Sorry, well, real quick. They've got the Washington game coming up. And so it's 2 days off in between then. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go with the court again. It's a tough game too. So they're going to need him.
Right.
But then after that, you are playing every other day plus one back-to-back up until the Four Nations break. So it is a jam-packed, condensed schedule. I don't know how this isn't one of those where there's a bunch of days off in between games and stuff. I don't know how you start Decord for like all of these. Like Grubauer is going to need at least 2 starts in that stretch if you're going to be, sane or rational here.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm definitely with you on that. All right. One of the other players though that has stepped up here, RJ, has been Chandler Stevenson. And, we've talked a lot this season about Chandler Stevenson and, the signing and whether or not it was a good decision to commit that much money in term to somebody who's, potentially blocking one of your center spots for Shane Wright or down the line a Berkeley Catton or whatever, right? Whoever it's going to be, that has been part of it. Or just the fact that, from an analytics perspective, Chandler Stevenson has had a rough season, right? Being down towards the bottom of the league in just about every metric at 5-on-5. So, but to his credit, last 10 games, RJ, 10 points for Chandler Stevenson. 9 of them have been at 5-on-5. That was one of the things we were critical on earlier in the year, was that a lot of his production was coming on the power play. Well, I guess it's not even all 5-on-5 because he does have the shorty. But point is, only 1 power play point out of those 10. So that is something good to talk about. He is shooting at 38.5% right now. He's got 5 goals in those 10 games. So that is definitely high, but +1, if you got that many like non-power play points, that's a little suspicious to me. So I'm trying to look at right now, I'm pulling up on Natural Stat Trick, his metrics for these last 10 games where he has been producing points. He has been showing up for the team versus what his season kind of total is. Right. And kind of comparing those two things. So I was just kind of in the middle of doing that. But I know you had also found an interesting stat from Chandler Stevenson for these past 5 games that the Kraken have played.
That's right. So with Chandler Stevenson, and as you said before we started recording this, hey, it's the Kraken's first high event player, because the one thing that's certainly happening is just stuff is going on when he's on the ice. Goals are being scored. And I think what we're seeing with Stevenson is his production has taken a big leap, and he is playing a lot better offensively, and he is just producing and producing and producing points wise. And it is, I think, at least in the last 5 games or so, more than making up for how bad I think he continues to be defensively. But you know what? Right now, the way he's playing, you kind of take that trade-off as long as he can produce this way. But the stat from the last 5 games, and I was just wondering, okay, Stevenson, it just feels like he's on the ice for, so much of the scoring, right? So in the last 5 games, Chandler Stevenson has been on the ice for 14 goals total in both directions in the last 5 games. And actually it is an even split, 7 goals for, 7 goals against, while Stevenson is on the ice over the last 5 games, which is a lot. It feels like a lot. That's an average of 2.8 goals per game that he is just on the ice for. And I feel like very few players are on the ice for almost 3 goals on average just about every game for a stretch. And I actually went back over the last 9 games. That also holds. He's been on the ice for 26 total goals over the last 9 games. And of course, that split 13 for, 13 against. So he is scoring, he's producing. He's also out there for just as many goals against, but at least it's kind of evening out. Whereas earlier in the season, I think you'd see those high goal total numbers, but most of them would be goals against.
Yeah. So I have the kind of advanced metrics here. Expected goals for percentage these last 10 games, he's at 41.72%. So it is still below 50%. It's still below, what you'd want it to be. But compared to his season number, which is 36.99, it is a marked step up in the right direction for him. So he's doing better there. And the same can be said for the high danger chances as well. 43.18 over the last 10 games versus 34.76 for the season. So he is playing better defensively, and on top of, or at least the offense is starting to drag up the defense over this last 10 games. And so, that's still critical. Like I said, those numbers are still not good, but they are certainly better than bottom of the league, which is where he was kind of residing before going off on this. And the other thing, though, that I will say, just to give him credit, again, there's just not many guys on this Kraken team. Like, this Kraken team really does a good job of making you forget how potentially easy points can come in the NHL, RJ, right? Like, or at least like what good point production is in the NHL, because this is just a team that individually they just don't produce points. Like, nobody on this team really scores at an exceptionally high rate. Nobody goes out there and produces points at an exceptionally high rate. And so, you look at the Seattle Kraken, and Chandler Stevenson is up there amongst the team leaders, and he produces 10 points in his last 10 games, and it really feels like he's doing a lot. You and I looked a couple weeks ago, right? Jared McCann, who's still the points leader, it's your lowest point leader in the NHL on any team, right? At 36 points. You look at your goals leader, Jaden Schwartz, with 16. That's pretty low for a goal leader in the NHL so far this season. There's lots of players that I've just been seeing and I've been noting, and they've got like 15 goals. There's 2 defensemen I could think of with 15 goals this year, and Jacob Chychrun and Zach Werenski. Tyler Bertuzzi with Chicago has 15 goals this season inexplicably, and he has not looked like a good player in the games that we have seen the Kraken play against the Chicago Blackhawks, and he doesn't even necessarily get a lot of ice time on a team where he has no support around him. And he's got as many goals as your goal leader, right? So it's one of those things where I do think, yes, Chandler Stevenson is tied for second on this team in point production. 33 points of 47 games is not nothing. It is significant what he's doing. I just think as a whole, the Kraken, they do a good job of kind of warping our thinking of how many points that really is vis-a-vis what other NHL teams are able to do.
And I think that's a good point to make, just when you compare it to other Kraken players and everything. But I will say Stevenson's production, like if you can get point per game production over a long stretch, that just is good.
It is,
no matter where you see it. And so, and to the eye test too, because we've thrown a lot of numbers in here, but of course we've been watching every game that Stevenson's been playing, and like to my eye test, I have to admit, at least offensively, he is playing better than he was before. And I'm seeing types of plays from him that I wouldn't have seen earlier this season. Like you look at his goal a couple games ago against LA, and the way that he kind of cuts out wide and then goes right back to the slot just in time for a tip. Like, that's not a play I'm used to seeing from him. He's the kind of guy who will normally just take the outside and loop around and try and make himself a passing option. But he actually does drive to the high slot and make a tip there. And so he is going to those areas a little bit more. I mean, you look at his goal, excuse me, last night against Buffalo, and yeah, it starts with him on the perimeter and it turns into kind of the shooting gallery where the Kraken just fire shots. But Stevenson does inch back toward the net, gets open on the backside, and the puck finds him, and he's in the perfect spot to just put it right into an open net. And that is good positioning. That is a place where, again, we wouldn't often see Chandler Stevenson. So he is starting to have more of those good offensive habits that do generate goals. And so while you look at like maybe his shooting percentage or so over that last 10 game stretch, you think, okay, I don't know, what is it, 38%, something like that?
38 and a half, yeah.
Yeah, that's obviously that's not sustainable for anybody. I am seeing some changes in the habits a little bit, that while it's not going to lead to that kind of goal production all the time, it is going to lead to better numbers offensively over a long stretch, I think, if he continues to play this way.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of what we're, seeing with Matty Beniers, which is stuff started working for him, right? He got some of those goals that we looked at, like that one in Pittsburgh, right? And we're like, okay, Jari really let that one in, or, there's a couple goals that were just kind of like the one in that Vancouver game, right? Where it was just like, oh, okay, Demko's maybe not on his stuff tonight. I do think that those plays, like, yes, we were maybe a little critical of like, okay, that's not a play that's going to happen very often. But when you're that player and that stuff is starting to go in for you and you've been struggling to score on the year, it really helps your confidence, right? And then just like with Matty Beniers, as we've talked about, as the production has been there, his confidence has gone up, and we're starting to see him attempt or make plays that we were not seeing from him earlier this year. I think the same thing is happening with Chandler Stevenson. I think their seasons really kind of parallel pretty nicely if you look at everything, and just they were kind of unlucky at the beginning of the year. They were kind of struggling. Then stuff starts going in, that kind of natural regression hits, and then they start feeling things and they get a little bit more bold out there with their play. And then that leads to that snowball effect of you start getting more production because you are taking those chances that could more likely result in goals happening for your squad. So I do think that, a lot of what we've talked about with Matty Beniers probably applies to Chandler Stevenson as well. And just, he's feeling confident, right? And he should be, because the production has been there for him, and it's been welcome for the Kraken. Let's talk about some potential trades here, RJ. As we spent a lot of, I don't know where the time went, but a lot of time went by in the Joey Decord discussion. So we're at 55 minutes, but let's talk about some potential trades here. The one that everybody's been talking about as a potential option, just because news out of New Jersey has been that maybe he's not happy with his current spot, is Simon Nemec, who was the second overall pick in the 2022 NHL entry draft. Defenseman drafted by New Jersey, has kind of been buried in their lineup, spent a lot of time in the AHL level. It sounds like, wants to really get his NHL career started, wants to get some playing time. And Kraken fans have really looked at that and said, hey, we just traded for a former second overall pick in Kaapo Kakko. Look how great that's working out, as we've been able to give him more playing time than his previous team, and he's been able to produce a lot for us. Let's see if we can make that happen again, this time on the blue line, RJ. And you know what? I don't see a reason not to, be phoned in New Jersey if you're Ron Francis, and just seeing what the situation is there.
Yeah, definitely. This is another one of those trades, just like the Kaapo Kakko trade that we talked about right before it happened, that Ron Francis should absolutely be in on these types of conversations. It's easy to see kind of the similarities right there with a second overall pick, somebody who isn't quite happy with the situation in the organization, wants more opportunity. I think Nemec would certainly cost more because he was a more recent draft pick, and because as a 20-year-old defenseman too, he's still developing, and you wouldn't expect him to kind of reach his peak. And with the Rangers and Kakko, I think there was a feeling that maybe this just is what he is, right? He's at the age where players tend to stop developing a ton. Can't say the same about Nemec. Like, he's got his whole career basically ahead of him, so he will be more expensive. But I think if you could get him at a reasonable price, that's absolutely the type of player the Kraken should try to bring in. I haven't really seen anything discouraging in his play as far as how he can develop as a potentially NHL defenseman in the top four, right? I mean, have you?
Well, I think this is where I'm going to maybe throw some cold water on it. And that is because, look, he's a guy that leans offensive in his game. Like, he is a guy that has some offensive abilities and is going to maybe want to be in a more offensive role. And I think one of the reasons why it hasn't totally worked out in New Jersey has been, you can't just have 6 offensive defensemen, right, on your team, right? Like, you kind of want a balance of maybe 1 per D pair. And New Jersey has some other offensive defensemen kind of on their team already that are going to soak up more minutes, as they are a team that is a contender, and they need to put their best foot forward night in, night out. Luke Hughes, obviously his development took priority over Simon Nemec, but then you've got Dougie Hamilton, who's going to chew up a lot of minutes each and every night for you, who's also going to be a guy who's going to contribute a lot offensively and be involved in the offensive side of the ice. And so I think that's been a big part of this, has just been they have other offensively minded guys that are taking those opportunities away from the younger player in Shimon Nemeth. And I do worry about that with the Kraken as well, because younger guy, a little bit more offensively minded, going to be buried under Vince Dunn, Brandon Montour, Riker Evans. I don't know where he slots in for the Kraken, unless you're going to kind of change what his play style was, what ended up, kind of making him the second overall pick in his draft. So I would say that would be one of the maybe concerns or something that I would have to think about before approaching New Jersey on a trade like this, is just where does he really fit in the lineup? And is that a spot where he can develop the way he wants to, the way he can get the ice time that he wants to, before, maybe this just turns into the same issue with him here.
And as the blue line is right now, I think you're right. If you had to keep this framework around him, I don't know where he slots in kind of long term. But one thing I really hope, whether it's Ron Francis or another GM this summer, how they look at this blue line and this team really is, I don't think really almost any player should be untouchable when you look at kind of remaking the roster, because we've talked about this group of players. It just doesn't work. And so I think you need to actually make some larger changes. And I don't think that should let you get in the way of acquiring a player like Simon Nemeth potentially cheaply, that you could get, who, look, age-wise, I think he fits in with your core a heck of a lot better than even a Vince Dunn or a Brandon Montour. And so if you do make that deal, I think somebody like, and I know he's one of the defensive guys, but like Adam Larson should be on the table. Alexiak already should be on the table to move somebody out just because of his contract situation. And if you need to look into moving one of Brandon Montour or Vince Dunn, I know these are like larger conversations that, fans might not like, but I'm going to talk about this plenty on the Armchair GM stream on Friday for the patrons. There's always going to be demand for that offensive puck moving defenseman, especially on the high end of a lineup. And as the Kraken just need a star forward, or a forward that can actually be a proper difference maker, it might mean having to move one of those guys, or having to move even a Riker Evans, just because you have to give to get in any kind of big trade. I think the Kraken should be open to those sorts of things, especially if it's one of their older guys. If you couldn't, I know Montour's got the full no trade clause. So maybe, you can't move him, but I think you should be open to exploring all those sorts of things. And it shouldn't stop you from going after a player like that if you think you can acquire him cheaply.
Yeah, no, it's just one where there would need to probably be a little bit more massaging to the roster in the near term if you want it to work out long term, and you want him to be able to get the ice time, right? Same thing we talked with.
What do you mean by near term?
I mean, like in the next year or two.
Okay, well, I think there should be plenty of changes to the roster in the next year or two.
But the blue line is one where it's maybe a little bit more in flux, especially as it's a little bit more solid, just in the terms of you have those other puck moving defensemen there, right? Like the big thing that it would signal is you're then looking at maybe trading a Vince Dunn as part of a larger trade for a forward, not this upcoming offseason, but maybe the following offseason. Right. Or maybe at the trade deadline next season, right? If he's willing to move his no trade clause, it does seem apparent that you are having to go younger, right? Like it means that something like that has to happen, because it's just like we talked about with Shane Wright. Young players need minutes to develop. You don't necessarily want to just throw him out there for 12 minutes a night on your third pairing for a couple years and be like, oh, why didn't he develop? Right? Why is he upset? Right? That's what's happening to him now. You don't want to be in that spot with him. You want to be able to do what you've been able to do with Riker Evans, where, the moment somebody goes down, boom, he's up on the top pairing, right? And he's playing big minutes when you can, and you're putting him out there in different special team situations and all of that kind of stuff. And I just don't think the way the Kraken are right now, assuming that they're healthy, which, you kind of have to assume, they're in a position to be able to do that with him. And so I think that is something just to note around any trade with him. That, and unless it's just a pick and prospect return, which I don't know if you're the Kraken, you want to be trading a lot of picks right now just because you're going to be drafting high in these rounds. you're looking at trading maybe like an
I mean,
Oliver.
don't move this year's first for him.
Yeah, certainly not. Right. You're looking at then maybe moving from like an NHL perspective that a team would want, like an Oliver Bjorkstrand, who we know his name was floated in that Elliot Friedman report from last week as potentially being available. And then there becomes a lot of problems as far as like New Jersey needing to shed salary to make that acquisition work. And I don't know, you're going to take on Andre Palat's contract. Like, does that really make it, is Simone Nemec worth taking that contract on? I don't know that it is, right? So there's a lot of complicated stuff that would have to be figured out around a player like this. I like the thinking. This is the thinking we've been talking about all season, right? 2 months ago, I was talking about Florida's the blueprint. These are the type of deals you need to move. You made the Kakko one. I like the idea of targeting Nemec as a player. I just think the fit is not nearly as good as Kakko's fit was, where Kakko absolutely was exactly what the Kraken needed. Simone Nemec is certainly something every team wants an abundance of, puck-moving defenseman. I just think you already have 3 on the roster. It'll make it very hard for him to be in a better spot than what he's in right now, which is he's just an AHLer, and he's producing at the AHL level. He could do that for you in Coachella Valley, but if he wants more than that, I don't know that the Kraken can give it to him.
Yeah, I can't argue with you on the fit. Like Kakko, yeah, they need forwards more than they need defensemen, but you got to be looking at everything, and this is still a good opportunity.
Definitely. Some other guys, right? JT Miller has been floated, right? Like, it sounds like maybe he could be out in Buffalo or in Vancouver. RJ, I'm not sure I'm interested.
Yeah, I'm not interested either. And again, he just doesn't fit the timeline for this team. He's 31 years old, to be 32 by the end of the season, and he is a heck of a player. He's very talented. He's skilled, but just again, what this team needs in the very, very short term, if everything rests on making the playoffs like next year, then I suppose he helps, but otherwise, no. And even then, I don't think the Canucks would be willing to trade him to somebody so close and in the division. I just don't think they'd be looking at a deal like that. Or maybe there's one scenario in which they would, that you mentioned before we started recording, and I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, obviously there's been lots of rumors about the situation in Vancouver and the potential rift between JT Miller and Lars Pedersen and that maybe being an issue. And so the only way I see a team trading a player as good as JT Miller in division, certainly to like a regional semi-market rival the way Seattle would be to Vancouver, is if you like truly believed, like after having him on your team, you're like, okay, this guy is a locker room cancer. Let's go ahead and send him over to them, right? Like that would be the only scenario. And I can't believe that's the case here or anything close to that extent. That's the only time I see a team being willing to trade somebody like that to a division rival, is if it's really like, hey, we actually think this is a form of sabotage and we're going to be able to get away with something. I just think, yeah, bottom line is JT Miller just doesn't really make sense from a fit standpoint. Like you mentioned, the age doesn't really make sense. You'd be adding another center. Like, you have too many centers. In the long term, you have too many centers. This is a guy who's got a lot of term left on his contract, similar to Chandler Stevenson. You don't need 2 of those contracts while you're still trying to develop Matty Beniers and Shane Wright. You're going to have Berkeley Catton come in and be added to the mix, and potentially other guys like a Julius Mietinen down the line. It just makes no sense to add in anybody who plays down the middle if you're the Seattle Kraken, unless you're moving a center out. And outside of it being Chandler Stevenson, I don't know that it would make sense to like include a Shane Wright, Matty Beniers, or Berkeley Catton in a trade for JT Miller. That would be the most panic move of all time. So I don't see anything happening on the JT Miller front at all.
Yeah, stay far away from him. And not that it would even happen. I guess, if the Canucks are willing to move Pedersen instead of Miller, I say give up whatever you have to go get him. But I don't think the Canucks are going to move Pedersen. If they did, I certainly don't think it would be to Seattle. So I don't think it's really worth talking about. But if he's on the market, offer anything that you have to go get him.
I'd take JT Miller for a 7th. Find a way to make that, and a shedding of a bad contract to make the money work. Like, I'd do that. Who wouldn't? The last one here, RJ, and this one is quick. Philip Grubauer for Tristan Jarry. Jarry struggling with the Penguins, like you said, sent down after the Kraken played them. I think the idea there is just, kind of expensive goalie for expensive goalie. 2 guys that maybe just need a change of scenery. You believe in the goaltending coaching prowess that the Kraken have, like we do. Maybe that's able to get Tristan Jarry, who's a little bit younger, right? Your thoughts on that?
Don't do it. It's not worth it. And the key part is that Jari's contract goes 1 year longer than Grubauer's. And I don't really think either of those two goalies can be, a difference making starter for you or get back to that level anytime soon. And so all you're doing is just prolonging your problem by 1 year or making the buyout 2 years longer. If it doesn't work out, no, don't do it. If Jari had the same term as Grubauer, I'd say, okay, maybe look into it, just because I think, both guys could probably use a change of scenery. But the extra year of term on the contract means no way.
Yeah, I was gonna say him being a couple years younger, Tristan Jari,
and it is a little cheaper. The contract
it's
is a little bit less, but it's not enough
cheaper.
to make a difference.
No, it's very
only by like less than league minimum.
Yeah, it is very slight difference in the money there. So I'm basically counting that as a wash. I do think that Tristan Jari has more of a chance of a change of scenery, getting him right, and him being able to come back and play, decently at the NHL level. I do think that exists for him, but the bottom line is you've got Joey locked up on his deal for the next 5 years. You need to find a way to make your goaltending situation cheaper if you are the Seattle Kraken. Just that is the priority. And I got to think that you can find somebody who can give you league average-ish production for a lot cheaper than paying a goaltender a number that starts with 5. Right. And that's the big thing here. And so I just think, it's better to keep Grubauer. If you're going to buy him out in the offseason, you buy him out, because that extra year of term then means buyout shorter too.
Exactly. So I think there's no real reason to do that. And I know earlier this season, we were maybe exploring, okay, you try and trade Grubauer for a similarly struggling goaltender and on a similar contract and see. But at this point in the season too, like there's no urgency to do that.
No,
you're not in the playoff hunt. If now it's one thing if the Kraken were maybe 2 points out of a playoff spot and Joey's just rattling off these great games and you feel like you can't start Grubauer, maybe you're a little more desperate to try something like that. But right now it doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. But those are the trades that we've seen people, maybe bring up and potentially want to see happen, and the names that have been floated out there. So we thought we'd talk about it. But that's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. Again, one more time, I want to thank our wonderful sponsor, law offices of Rico Tessendor. Again, hope you're never in a situation like I was this past weekend where, you think you're going to need him there. But if you do, because stuff happens, and, that's another one where you're not at fault. Other people do stuff, right? Like things just happen in life. And when they do, we hope that you call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation, and they'll help you out as a fellow member of the ECH community. Thanks everybody for listening, and we will see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons. Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.